What's up, guys? It's Brandon Flash. Today we are in a car, but we are not talking about cars. We are talking about why I went from an iPhone 16 Pro Max to an iPhone 17 Pro. As I mentioned, today is a little bit different. We're actually going way back to my early YouTube roots on a different channel. You probably won't be able to find the videos, and you really shouldn't. But I used to do tech videos way back. They were terrible, well before I did EV content. And I figured I'd do a little bit of a throwback. I upgraded from the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which I've filmed a ton of videos using this on this channel. I'm actually filming this on an iPhone 16 Pro, that's my wife's phone. And I upgraded to the iPhone 17 Pro. And I figured because this year is the most pro phone, as Apple has claimed, I am the pro that they're targeting, the creator, if you will. And let's talk about it. So, first impressions, I went from the Pro Max, the big boy, to the Pro. And a lot of people do the opposite or go back and forth. I've had a mix of the bigger phone and the smaller phone over the years, and this year I decided to go with the smaller one. They're touting battery life improvements, so I figured this is the year to go with the smaller phone. We also have a baby on the way. I figured I'd probably end up using it a lot more with one hand, with a toddler or baby in one arm, especially when traveling and such. So I figured a little bit easier one-handed phone would be better. I also found that even with the Pro Max with the better battery life, I still ended up carrying a battery pack or charging brick or something when going on longer days anyway. And if I still have to do that with the Pro, then what's the difference? I'd rather have a little bit smaller phone. Using the Pro Max here and there, just since switching to the Pro, the screen on the Pro Max is really nice, but it's still heavy and big. And I much prefer using the Pro just for my everyday use. And I think it's a lot more comfortable and easier to use for longer periods as you're doing it. With the Pro Max, sometimes, especially if I was using it one-handed for more than like 5-10 minutes, sometimes my wrist would get a little bit fatigued, and that doesn't seem to be happening with the Pro. I know a lot of people have been complaining about the aluminum and how it's a less premium material, and I guess it is, but premium on an iPhone Pro is actually not premium in the same way that it should be for something else. Yes, titanium I think is a higher end material, but when the main characteristic that you need in the material is thermal dissipation, aluminum is a lot more effective at that, and I think that is what makes aluminum more pro for an iPhone Pro. And I think why titanium is more fitting for the iPhone Air, because that's more of a premium device than it is a pro device. We'll get to the iPhone Air in a little bit here, referencing some notes. Cosmic orange and the deep blue or dark blue, I forgot what they called it, but both are nice colors. I personally went silver even before any of the Scratchgate stuff came out. I just thought that silver is a little bit more of a kind of classic Apple color. I have a silver MacBook Pro. I have a silver iPad Pro. I have the titanium Apple Watch Ultra, and I just really like silver. I also thought that silver will go good with any case color, and the orange would just end up reflecting on everything that I film, especially if it has windows like cars, which I often am filming. And yes, silver is a little bit lighter color, but you won't notice it as much as bright orange. And then I can always just use a darker case. Another factor for silver is that if I want in the summer, I can put a lighter or a clear case on it, and the lighter color helps keep it cooler a little bit longer because instead of absorbing the heat as much, it's reflecting it a bit more. I've had this phone for about a week now. I got it on launch day on Friday. Today is Tuesday. And so far, battery life has been totally fine. I really don't notice any meaningful difference from the 16 Pro Max. regardless, I'm usually using over 100% of the battery each day. However, I'm not really strapped to a charger or anything. At least for my day-to-day use, I'm usually charging it to 90% overnight. I also, pro tip, use the slowest charger you can overnight. That will help extend your battery life. And then I usually charge it in the car while I'm driving to work. I use wired CarPlay in my F-150 Lightning. That's about 15-20 minutes depending on the day. And then I go about using it throughout the day and then drive home and also have it on CarPlay. So another 15-20 minutes. In my F-150 Lightning, I believe that's only a 15 watt and it's also using power for CarPlay. So it's really not adding that much energy, but that is enough to then make it through the night. And maybe I'll sometimes plug it in the evening, just speaking from experience, but I haven't had to do that with the 17 Pro. So far, battery life, totally fine. I mean, if I can make it to the end of the day without having to go out of my way to plug it in, that's a win in my book. I'm going to be doing some traveling, so we'll see how that goes. Those days tend to be a little bit longer and a little bit less around my vehicle when plugging in or being plugged in, so we'll see how those go. Overall, using it impressions. I am surprised at how much smoother it is. 16 Pro Max is obviously no slouch, and it's last year's phone. I mean, until a week ago, it was the latest phone. And I never really had complaints about it being slow, even on iOS 26 with the changed animations and everything. But for some reason, somehow the 17 Pro is noticeably smoother. Both have the 120 hertz display, both have it turned on, obviously. But like just the overall use, the animations, the interactions with the screen, scrolling, instead of having like even slight stutters here and there, it just seems to be buttery smooth in basically every interaction with the phone. Thermals are noticeably better. In cases that the 16 Pro Max would be absolutely roasting hot, the 17 Pro barely gets warm to the touch. The 16 Pro Max, it would just be hot basically all the time. If I'm charging it, if I'm taking photos, if I'm uploading photos to Lightroom or to my Synology server or to Google Photos or whatever, if I'm watching YouTube videos, if I'm charging it, if I'm using CarPlay, basically all the things I do on a very regular basis on the phone, it would get hot. And when I mean hot, like almost to the point of being uncomfortable to touch in some cases, especially if I'm fast charging it while also like uploading to my server or backing up photos or whatever, or especially like airdropping to my MacBook Pro. Whereas the 17 Pro, of course, it does still get a little bit warm, but it's not anywhere near to that level. And it seems to be, at least from the thermal images that I've seen a lot of people post, that a lot of the heat is dissipated in the camera plateau area, as they're calling it, which is really actually useful because instead of having it trapped within a case, it's on the exposed part in most cases, so that way it can even more easily distribute that heat. Another thing is that oftentimes with the 16 Pro Max, I would be outside for a couple minutes on a warmer day and the screen would dim because it got too hot and would have to dim to function or keep functioning. Whereas today I did a test, I was on a walk and I had a 4K video recording for 8 minutes. And then at that point it slightly dimmed, but then it also recovered a lot faster than the 16 Pro Max would have. And the phone itself was not uncomfortable to touch. It was just warm. So that's a noticeable improvement. And again, the overall performance is much better. With the new N1 networking chipset, this does not have the C1X cellular modem. That's only on the Air, which was a little bit confusing how they talked about that in the keynote. But networking performance as a whole is significantly improved on this. They did use a new Qualcomm 5G modem for the cellular, and in my office, which is a metal and concrete building, 2 levels, nothing crazy, I had basically useless cell service on the 16 Pro Max, and same with most of my coworkers. Whereas with the 17 Pro, I actually have service. it's basically miraculous. And I didn't switch carriers or anything. I'm still using AT&T, but the mere fact that I could actually load a web page on cellular in my office building is a noticeable improvement. So that's improved. I also did some testing around my house on Wi-Fi, and the 16 Pro Max had some pretty notorious dead spots in my house. I did end up fixing that with some access points since upgrading phones, aka yesterday. And I did some testing before I did that with both phones back to back, going into different rooms of my house, including the attached garage and such. And the 16 Pro Max would consistently have nearly half the throughput on Wi-Fi than the 17 Pro would have. So that's also a noticeable improvement. And there were some spots that the 16 Pro Max was even struggling to connect, whereas the 17 Pro had no issues on Wi-Fi at all throughout the house. So that's a big difference just in day-to-day use that you'll notice if you have any sort of signal struggles either on cellular or on Wi-Fi. Bluetooth, I don't really ever push to the point where it matters, and I haven't used AirDrop enough to notice if there's a difference there. But based on what I'm seeing with everything else, I am expecting that AirDrop will likely work a bit better and probably a bit faster with the 17 Pro than I experienced with the 16 Pro Max. Apple claims that you can fast charge this phone from 0 to 50% in 20 minutes. I did do testing on that. It does meet that claim. Apple did their test from the moment that the phone turned on, whereas I did it from the moment that the phone was plugged in, and regardless, the result was essentially the same. I ran the phone all the way dead until the point that it shut down on its own, and then I used a Anker 140 watt battery pack with a 240 watt cable, so that way neither of those were the limiting factor. And it did do a peak of about 36 watts, and it held that actually pretty long until about 50%. So good charging curve for my usual electric car audience that knows I love to talk about my charging curves. Realistically, it doesn't really matter. It charges fast enough in my experience, and that doesn't seem to be any different than any recent iPhone that I've had, at least the 16 Pro Max. Cameras, they don't seem to be a huge improvement. I do really like the switch to the 4 and 8X versus the 5X on the 16 Pro Max. And also having the higher resolution on the telephoto is also really appreciated. I wish I had had this phone for the cameras when I was just in Acadia National Park and up in Maine, where I took a lot of nice photos, but it was a week late. Anyway, having the higher resolution on the telephoto is a welcome addition, because oftentimes when I was in pretty places like national parks, I would have to choose between whether I wanted to have the telephoto for the depth effect or the flattening effect, or just to see things farther off, or if I wanted the higher resolution and better quality of the 1X. I do wish they had put some effort into improving the 0.5 ultra wide. It's not bad by any means, but I think there is room for improvement there. It's already 48 megapixels, but that megapixels don't really tell you the full story. And I think there's some room for overall improvement there, both on the lens distortion and just kind of overall quality and low light performance, I think are things that they can improve there. Already touched on battery life. The front camera, that's the big change this year. So there's the new center stage front camera, which I can just demonstrate for you guys. So we'll flip to the front facing camera there. As you can see I'm just in a parking lot here. And so you can go wide, and then you can also force the swap to wide or to landscape without actually turning your phone. I actually haven't tried doing it vice versa. Let's try that. So there you can do, so you can have it horizontal and then still do a vertical shot, which is also pretty cool. And on video, you can do the exact same. So you can have your phone horizontal and shoot a vertical video, or you can have your phone vertical and shoot, wrong button, a horizontal video. Something that I think they could improve there is that with the square sensor, I feel like they're not fully taking advantage of it. I would like to see them give us the option of just capturing the full square shot, so that way you have the most flexibility to then crop it down. That would be especially useful for video, especially with a lot of people doing both horizontal, landscape, and vertical. So if you did a video for, say, YouTube, that way you could also then cut it in Final Cut to be vertical for TikTok or Reels or whatever. And then that way you'd have the most flexibility with the same content, which I think would be very useful. I would also really like to see this on the back cameras. That's probably dreaming a little bit to have that on all three of the back cameras, but I think that would be really awesome. And again, I would love to see the same, that you could capture the entire square sensor and then choose to crop it afterwards, because then you would have just the most flexibility of basically any camera. As far as the transfer of data went, so I did a wired device-to-device transfer using a USB-C cable. I don't think the USB-C cable was actually being used realistically, because I started it and then plugged it in, and the time didn't change at all. And I unplugged it once just to see if anything happened, and the time stayed the same that it was estimating. So I don't think it was doing anything, but it was there anyway. I think that's an opportunity for improvement as well for Apple. They can make it that your cookies or whatever caching for app logins transfer better. I think that would be a lot nicer. There's still, even with the device to device transfer, a lot of apps I had to log back into, which not the end of the world, but a little annoying. And if you watched my main video, you saw that I picked up a Pixel 9a. I did try that out for a little bit. I never made it my main phone or anything. But I think doing that made me realize that the grass isn't greener on the other side. I did want to try Android. It's been a while since I've used an Android phone for more than like a few minutes here and there. I like the idea of an Android phone because of the Gemini features and stuff like that. That was pretty cool. However, I am way too deep into the Apple ecosystem to even consider changing. Basically, the moment I set that phone up, I quickly realized that because I have my password saved in the Apple Passwords app, I have no way of accessing any of those on the Android phone, which made it kind of a non-starter to even log into half my apps without having to manually type in my randomly generated passwords, which was pretty annoying. I did it on a few apps just to kind of get the experience and see what those apps were like on the Android phone. And most of the apps I tried, X being the most notable one, I think, the overall experience in that app was just notably worse than the iOS version, which is unfortunate. Something I really like in the X app is that you can kind of swipe. So like if you go into a tweet, you can then swipe back and stuff like that. And as far as I could tell, you couldn't do that in the X app, which was pretty annoying, or at least on Android. And yeah, I think as much as I would like to switch to Android, or would like the idea of switching to Android, it's just not possible for me at this point. And leads me to my next point, which is I think Apple should make a foldable phone. I think a lot of people have talked about it. The Air is kind of a precursor to the foldable coming potentially. And I think I would be very interested in that, especially if it means that I can have a phone roughly the size of this 17 Pro, but then be able to flip it open and have double the screen size. That would be really cool. The Air, if you haven't seen it in person, it's not for me. One camera is a deal breaker. The battery I could work with, but only having the 1X camera is just a non-starter for me, unfortunately. But regardless of what phone you pick up, you should go to an Apple store, carrier store, whatever, and at least go experience the Air in person. I think it's one of those phones that you really just need to hold to understand how thin it is and how nice it feels in your hand. The edges are really nice and curved. It's super light. I think the thing you notice the most with the Air is that not so much the size or the thinness, but just how light it is in your hand as a result of being so thin and just not having that much to it. So not for me. I look forward to them improving that phone over time. We'll see if they even make a new version of it next year, since they notably did not number that phone. It's not the 17 Air, it's just the iPhone Air. And we could see an iPhone Fold next year, potentially replacing the iPhone Air, which I think would be very interesting. Action button, I don't really use it. I don't know if you guys do. Comment down below. I have it set to unlock my Tesla just because sometimes the phone key can be a little finicky, and then that way you just have a hard button to do it. camera control, I sometimes will use it just to open the camera. I did use it actually quite a bit last year when we were in Europe with the 16 Pro Max because I had gloves on. It was winter and that was just an easier way to open the camera. But day to day, I have just such a muscle memory of using the lock screen button that the thought usually doesn't even cross my mind to use the camera control button. And I have all the like swipey features to switch lenses and zoom and all that. I have that all turned off because I found them to be way too annoying. And I also, initially with the 16 Pro Max, I was constantly changing the photographic styles with the camera control on accident, and that was just making all my photos look terrible. So, I would like to know what you guys think. Did you upgrade? Also, what did you guys think of this video, doing tech videos on here? I know it's a little bit different than a lot of other people will do as far as their iPhone 17 series content. This is obviously mostly an EV channel, not a tech channel, but early on I did brand this channel as Tech, Sustainable Transport, and Travel. So I think this falls into the tech category. Anyway, if you haven't already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. See you guys on the next one. Oh, and before I go, if you're a normal person and you just want an easy recommendation, get the iPhone 17. The iPhone 17 this year is awesome. 17 Pro Max is 17 Pro and Pro Max are even awesomer. And the iPhone Air is cool, and I think you know who you are if you should get an iPhone Air. See you guys on the next one.